So Sony's 30th anniversary is among us. They've announced a bunch of stuff for it so far, but there may be a pro to keeping an eye on their announcements. It's Sunday, so let's get sensational. I'm Mike, and I'm back to talk about the gaming news professionally. Kind of like the PlayStation 5 professional that we talked about last week. So to quickly recap, Bill Coon via D-Labs claimed to have seen the packaging for the PS5 Pro and is saying that they'll be announcing it soon, like within the next few weeks. He also drew a picture of how the PS5 Pro looks in order to avoid any copyright claims from Sony. And while it looks like Sony may be indeed getting close to announcing the PS5 Pro. So Sony posted some banners for their 30th anniversary of the PlayStation, and yes, that does make me feel very old. But people noticed something in the image that they posted, and that something resembles a certain drawing that we talked about last week. So when zooming in, people noticed that this image had an icon of the current PS5, and then there's another icon that looks like a PS5 with more ridges in the middle that people think is probably the PS5 Pro. How did y'all find this? Because it was so small that there was no way I would have even noticed it by looking at the image. But anyway, this seems to point that maybe they're announcing the PS5 Pro sometime this month. In the blog post, they mentioned everything they're doing to celebrate their 30th anniversary, including the recent release of that Astrobot game. And the last thing they mentioned in the blog post is an esports tournament, which ends on September 22nd. So it looks like they're doing stuff for the whole month. The blog post also says to be on the lookout for more announcements. So yeah, it seems like they may announce this console this month, as it basically lines up perfectly with the 30-year anniversary of the PlayStation. And let's be honest, it does kind of seem like they're teasing it with that image and saying to keep an eye out for more announcements. So we'll see if we finally get the announcement in the next few weeks. But while we're on the subject of the PS5 Pro, a lot of people have been wondering about the price, especially after the price increase in Japan that started on September 2nd. So obviously, with the price increase in Japan, people were like, how much are they going to charge for this PS5 Pro? I even mentioned last week when I was covering the price increase that I didn't think it would be below $600. Well, analysts are now speculating what the price of the PS5 Pro will be, but first they addressed the price increase in Japan. So right now it looks like the price increase is an outlier. It's not a sign that they're going to raise prices again in other regions like they did a couple of years ago. Japan in particular has run into some economic issues, so the price of goods in general has increased, and Sony was just basically following suit with everyone else selling products there. So it's not an indicator that the PS5 Pro will be super expensive, except for maybe in Japan. There are two things that Sony could do in this situation. They could either cut the price of the current PS5 and then slot the Pro in at $500, or they could just charge more for the Pro. So IGN spoke with two analysts, and they're speculating that Sony won't cut the price of the current PS5 and that it'll probably sell the Pro for more money, around $600 to $650 when it launches. So this sounds about right. This is what I thought the price would be around at launch. While the price increase in Japan was an outlier, neither Sony or Microsoft has done a price cut this generation, so even though they're releasing a more powerful console, I don't see them reducing the prices of the current one. Maybe if Xbox was closer to them sales-wise, they would cut the price of the PS5 to undercut Microsoft, but I don't see that happening right now, especially with gaming revenue in general being down across the board. And also, they just had a disastrous game launch, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But for now, let's shift from PlayStation to talk about another giant in gaming, Acer. So over the last couple of years, the handheld PC market has been getting really competitive, specifically after the launch of the Steam Deck. We've had Asus and Lenovo come up with their handhelds. Zotac is launching the Zone at some point, and now Acer is joining the party with their handheld, the Nitro Blaze 7. So this Acer handheld is going to have a 1080p, 7-inch, 144Hz LCD touchscreen with FreeSync. Spec-wise, it's running an AMD Ryzen 8040 with 16 gigs of RAM, and the listing says it'll have up to 2 terabytes of storage, so I'm not sure if that means it'll have multiple SKUs with different storage sizes, but that seems to be the norm with these handhelds, so I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. Now, design-wise, it kind of reminds me of some of Ioneo's handhelds with the more rounded sides, and also it looks very red. As of right now, there's not any pricing or release date that was given. Acer just said it will be released in the near future, and what we've seen with these handhelds in the past is usually a pretty short announcement to release window. So the only questions I really have right now that aren't addressed is, will it have USB 4 to support things like eGPUs? And of course, where does it fall price-wise? It looks like it's going to be really close to the ROG Ally and the Ally X specs-wise, and if the battery isn't as good as the Ally X, then it'd be hard to compete at $800, so we'll see where it falls price-wise. And of course, it is a Windows-based handheld, so they're going to have their own overlay on Windows to launch games and customize the controls, but it looks like Microsoft may finally be taking steps to help these handheld PCs be more usable in Windows. So they recently rolled out an update to Windows 11 that allows people to use an Xbox controller to control the virtual keyboard, which makes it a lot easier if you're playing a handheld docked and using a controller and you need to type something, which I can confirm is a nightmare without having a keyboard plugged in. Microsoft previously said that they're trying to make the Windows experience better on devices with smaller screens and handheld gaming devices, so it seems like this is a small step in the right direction. And with SteamOS finally starting to add support for other handhelds, right now it's only the ROG Ally, but they probably don't want to risk losing market share to Valve in the handheld market. And speaking of losing, it seems like Sony suffered a huge loss with their most recent game launch, and that's what we're talking about today. And our final story. So I haven't talked about the game Concord on this channel because I tend to focus more on industry news and not individual games unless they're part of a bigger story. But I had heard a little bit about this game prior to launch. It seems like it wasn't picking up much steam, especially with it being a simultaneous PS5 and PC release for Sony. If you're not familiar with Concord, it's a multiplayer class-based shooter similar to something like Overwatch. It launched on August 23rd, so it's still fairly new. So we'll see how it does long term, especially with it being a cross-platform launch for Sony, is what I would say if they didn't already shut the game down. So no official sales figures have been released for this game since it launched a couple of weeks ago, but it's speculated that it sold less than 25,000 units. On the PC side, it only managed to peak at 697 concurrent players on Steam, which isn't an indicator of sales, that's just the max number of people playing at one given time. The most that it indicates is that maybe a lot of people on PC just weren't playing at the same time together at launch. Either way, I'm guessing the numbers weren't too good because on September 3rd, they announced via the PlayStation blog that they were taking the game offline on September 6th and automatically issuing refunds for people who purchased the game through PSN, Steam, and other digital storefronts. And if you got a physical copy, they're basically like, take it back to the store, which I'm not sure how that's going to work considering a lot of retailers don't take back open copies of games. So hopefully Sony has put out communications to them regarding this game and that they're shutting it down after 2 weeks. Now the reason they've given for the shutdown is that certain aspects of the game didn't land the way they intended, and they also mentioned that they're going to determine the best path ahead for the game, so it could come back. But considering that it wasn't doing well and they killed it in 2 weeks, I feel like releasing the game in the future with the same name wouldn't be a great idea because the IP has already been damaged from Sony pulling the plug so fast. So for now, and most likely forever, it's R.I.P. to Concord, but let me know your thoughts on Concord in the comments, especially if you got to try it. I personally didn't play it before the shutdown, so I'm curious on your thoughts on the game if you actually played it. Again, let me know down below, and if you enjoyed this video, then make sure to tell a friend, tell a coworker, like, share, and subscribe, and hit that bell notification button thing to be notified when I drop a video or a live stream. And I always do at least 2 things at the same time.